no further delay, it's a very quick round of introductions because I would love to leave space for conversation. So, very quick round of introduction. We have Nikunj. Nikunj, the founder of the Systems Plus group of companies. But more importantly, he's been a champion of Mantra for Change and an advisor to many nonprofits and helping them look at how they can scale their work. We have Bharath. Bharath is Executive Director India at the British Asia Trust and leads a lot of the work in the education, livelihoods, and social finance space. We have Camille. Camille is the President and CEO of Synergos, a global organization that works with many family offices in solving complex social issues at scale. We have Neeta. Neeta is with Co-Impact and comes with a lot of experience in shaping and supporting collaboration across sectors. It's very deeply with change leaders in the social sector. And finally, we have Sudarshan. Sudarshan comes with decades of experience as a leader from Deloitte, but also has been involved in their CSR efforts and in shaping very large-scale CSR initiatives in India. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today afternoon. Nikunj has an adventure ahead of him. He has to head to the airport and hopes to make his flight on time today.
The big issue which most starting up entrepreneurs have is how am I going to get resources? And when I say resources, it's not just money. It's money, of course, big part, but connections to the system, to maybe pedagogy, if they're doing education, to government officials, to anybody. So that's it, connections. And also knowledge is, how do I do this? Why should I have to reinvent the wheel single time? If a mantra has done it before, why can't I just, as Jack said today beautifully, copy and copy one format? But that is the first thing which we need to think about. And so I think how do you get that money is the challenge. Or how do you get that interest from somebody is a big challenge most nonprofits face. This is how I think something has worked for, and how I have given my time and my funding to people is when somebody comes to me with a end-to-end story. And, you guys are the Sanjay or the masters of this, is when somebody has designed for scale. So they have actually got the entire story in front of you. Say, yeah, this is what my model is. This is my depth model. We want to get there. This is how we are hoping to get there. Be part of the journey. And think of us as a seed funder. If you're looking at startup capital, our role is to say, look, here, I am the angel investor here. I'll give you some funding, but more directly, I will open up doors for you. And then that is what you need to pitch for. If you just say, I want money for just the idea, you will very rarely get it. But if you say, I want to be the partner with me. So, be an investor or be a shareholder, quote unquote, with me through the entire journey. And you'll be on my cap table, I call it, but you'll be part of our thing, even when you become a co-impact grantee. You will yet be an important part of our model. That's when people get interested. I think that's the way I would start this, Lakshmi, is come with an entire end-to-end vision, end-to-end story, show your depth model and come with your scale model as well. And we know that you will make mistakes. We know you will pivot 500 times. We are betting on you, not on your thing. But we know at least you're thinking of scale. And that's the important part.
Thank you, Nikunj. And it's just, I'm going to do a quick follow-up question. Right? Obviously, the first thing that people think about is who's going to provide direct capital. The money is, it's hard, right? These journeys are difficult, resources are constrained, so it's but natural that social entrepreneurs kind of think of money as the first constraint. But how does one signal the willingness? This is on both sides, both from people who can provide that kind of social, intellectual capital. How do you signal this to people that are seeking those kind of inputs, and how do social entrepreneurs kind of frame the ask of these kind of resources?
I think there's a signal going out here today. I'm here on this panel talking about this. That's a signal. And I am interested in scale model. If you have a scale model you want to talk about, reach out to me. LinkedIn is an easy way to reach out to, emails and stuff like emails don't work, but a linked profile or a warm connection always helps you get there. I think from the side of the philanthropist, you know, again, there are two types of philanthropists who normally give money to this. One is the individual like me who says, okay, I take a risk. And you also examine the kind of person that person is through your, what kind of investments have that person made. And you can easily see that. If you go onto LinkedIn, I've, somebody has put, I've worked with you here and somebody, the tax and somebody critic. This person works in only small organizations. Or this person works with larger organizations. Like that. So that's how you identify that this person is willing to look at. But there's another group, there are two more groups which I want to keep real, who potentially will look at scale, but are not the CSRs and the large FCRA organizations, not the Synergos and the co-impacts of the world, on family foundations in India, who have, and when I say family foundations, I'm not looking at the HCLs and all the world. I'm looking about people who are potentially sold businesses, individual entrepreneurs, have made decent amount of money and are willing to give back to society because they've said 10% of my money, I am going to give back. And they are willing to take risks because they're entrepreneurs. They were entrepreneurs in the first place. That's why they're willing to take risks. That's another organization set of people you should look after. And there's a third, which is community-based organizations. That's something which is ignored by most of you. That's called Rotary and Lions. Rotarians and Lions join Rotary and Lions to do some kind of service. Most Rotary and Lions would say, we'll set things on a water cooler and go away and take a picture. But there are larger organizations, larger clubs. In Bombay, there are a few clubs which are now saying, we will work with organizations outside of. To give you an example, my club did the seed funding for Mantra in Bihar. So that's the kind of models which I think you all have to explore to get this kind of.
Thanks, Nikich. Thanks. Bharath, I kind of want to come to you and kind of move a little, quite a bit away from the seed stage. But to say, particularly at BAT, you the champions of innovative financing models where you say, let's break some philanthropic capital together, let's get some public funding together. And so there is, you have been, your team has designed these programs, right? You have taken on the mantle of figuring out how I can bring various pools of capital together. But if one were to scale that kind of thinking, what are some of the skill sets, capabilities that
Lakshmi, and maybe just as context for the audience, you're right. But for us at BAT, we've done a lot of these programs that are collaborative in nature, and we have brought together different pools of capital into each of those programs. So, as maybe a couple of examples, just to sort of bring it to life, we run this program currently that's called LiveTED, which is focused on foundational literacy and NIMBU. And so this is working with the system. So it's not sort of delivering interventions in schools ourselves. So the program does not directly deliver interventions, but instead what it does is to partner with government schools to make sure that the government system is actually getting better. And therefore, it enables us, by the very design of the program, to reach a much larger scale than the otherwise at. So it's a program where across 4 years, we expect to reach about 4 million students and to be able to materially lift literacy and numeracy scores for those 4 million students over time. Right? So making sort of a meaningful difference at a relatively small cost of the intervention. This is a program into which we've got CSR partners like the Reliance Foundation. We've gotten Standard Chartered and some other work that we do. We've got HSBC. There's a pool of CSR capital. There is a pool of sort of foundations such as the Children's Investment Fund Foundation or the Michael Susan Death Foundation. So that there's sort of philanthropies like them. But in other programs that we've done, there's this thing that we run called the Skill Impact Poly, which is in partnership with the government, essentially to say, how do you make sure that skilling programs don't just deliver certificates, they actually deliver jobs? And then, so that's the shift that we are wanting the skill impact core to make. And that in the first phase, it delivered skills to about 50,000 people, with the goal being that at least 60% of them should end up in jobs for a period of at least 3 months after. Now, this is a program that we had the government also as a partner through the NSE, sort of quasi-government bank. But as we look at scaling it up, we are hoping to get 250 crores worth of government funding into that program, which would be roughly half of the scaled-up version of the program. So I think that's given us experience across government, across CSR, across philanthropy, both domestic and foreign. And I'd say I think some of the requirements to make this happen are, first of all, thinking on scale and on collaborative partnership, which often is something that we've seen other organizations struggle with. Right? Because unless it's something that you intend to do and it's something that you're doing sort of fairly intentionally, it doesn't happen automatically. And so that sort of design for something to be collaborative in nature, to be able to accommodate multiple different types of capital. CSR has requirements to be spent within a year and to show results within a year. So how do you even blend a pool which is CSR with philanthropy that might be thinking much longer term? Those sorts of design questions, I think, are central. So being able to design it intentionally in the first place, I think, is one big part. A second thing in our experience, and we've played this role of sort of transaction managers, as we've often called it, but often really what that comes down to is to actually govern that large pool of capital. So that function around governance is a second big piece of it. Because unless you're sort of managing each individual funder with that pool, they'll end up feeling like, their roles were not necessarily met. But there's also things like in most of these programs that we've run, they're actually in fact bonds. And what that means is that there are triggers for payment of funds from one funder to another, or from one funder to a partner, and so on, right? Which are usually around the achievement of specific objectives. So as I said, in the skill impact fund, that could be about actual placement in a job and retention in that job for at least 3 months. So that outcome being met would trigger a pay, which then requires you to have thought through the formulae based on which all of these payments happen. What happens if there's a dispute about whether a goal is met or not? So how do you govern all of those sorts of things, and how do you resolve those sorts of issues when they inevitably arise in a complex program? So those aspects of governance, I think, are critical aspect. And then finally, I suppose just the persistence maybe with sort of trying to unlock different pools of capital. Because, for example, when we would speak about these sorts of programs with CSR, there was an ingoing assumption that, well, CSR can't do this, or it's just not going to work, right? Because of the different constraints that I mentioned. But there are ways of making it happen. And again, sometimes it's a design issue. Sometimes it's a question of saying, well, how do we make sure that this pool of funding is deployed within the year and it delivers results within that year, which you can make happen even in the context of a much larger scale program. So it's sort of breaking that down and saying, look, what can this capital do within a year, and what results can therefore be shown. So I think it's sort of a combination of those with where I lead.
Sure. And do you find that because this is complex in terms of transactional aspects, like figuring out the money flow, then there's that amount of financial acumen that is required, and that kind of expertise and skill set may not be available with many system orchestrators or change leaders, even though they are looking at solving at scale. Sometimes a lot of their expertise lies in deep programmatic work or in deep community anchors, and or even in working with government, but may not necessarily, not saying it's always messy, but it may not necessarily be something that they are staffing their team to have from the get-go. So any idea, then I would love to hear from around the room on this, Imbal. Like, how do you fill that skill gap? Today, we have an organization like PD that's taking on that mantle, but that's not too common either. There's only so much VAT can do, but I would love to hear some ideas from around the room. That's a capacity that should be built.
So I think one thing just Alex seen happening of late now is there are great organizations whom I think are your labs. And let them be labs always. The innovation hubs of the different ideas you're trying. And then that organization, again, like Pankra, who know how to scale, who know how to work with the system, who know how to get funding and make sure it's all compliant. Still, it's how we start working together. is what I think is the magic. And that's where something like Shikshara becomes a great option. Where great, innovative organizing, which I'm sure wherever you are, will recognize that. And some from organizations like Mantraya, you know, PAT and all that actually help you with the entire home file stuff.
Sure.
On that note, happy to box.
Thank you, Ribas. Really appreciate it. I know you are in a rush, but we really appreciate you making the time. Talk. All right, I'm going to go over to Sudarshan because he said now CS has so many sides. So now there's no one else I can direct that question. Just, I'd love to hear your part with this. Obviously there are structural constraints and those are, not like, one can argue that these have to change, but all of that policy work will take its own time. But we also have to work with whatever constraints that are there at that point in time. It's also one of the most significant pools of capital, at least here in India, it's the most significant pool of capital available for social change. But what are some of the tensions that you've observed being on the other side here between, let's say, the speed at which or the time frame in which you need to show results, like BSR report, but also we know that systems change requires a lot of patience. Attribution is often difficult. How do you view some of these tensions, and how have you navigated some of these tensions?
As Deloitte, we're a bit fortunate because we are a partnership and are not bound by the mandates. So let's very promote flexibility, and it is more out of our own, can I say, gesture of uh, paying back to society. But notwithstanding, see, it partly answers what you asked earlier and become Josha, you did, is when you choose a partner, it's look at some partner who is beyond money. That was one of the preconditions that I had as the foundation head for Deloitte. Said that I will not partner with any organization where they are only looking at a check. So there has to be multiple touch points. There has to be at least 3 touch points. Right? So easy ones were money and volunteering. I said, let's do something else. So, for example, we ally with an organization which works with the underprivileged, the autistics. We created a program called Learn from Community. So there, the people from the agency used to, or the beneficiaries, quote unquote, as they call them, used to come to my office, and we used to send every I think every fourth Thursday or third Thursday, I forget, of 3 hours, where people from my organization would actually go and learn how to do embroidery or how to do knitting or whatever these people were skilled at. So it kind of created 2, 3 things. One, a greater visibility within my firm about the need for a social contribution. Be more alive and alert to this factor. But very importantly, it gave those people who came a huge amount of self-confidence. When we think of them coming into an organization like Deloitte, which is with its effects and with its lights and sound and light show kinds, and then they come here and teach us, and we learn from them. So it gives what kind of proportion of empowerment and self-confidence. So one of the things that when you look at a partner, don't look at a partner only for money. Look at what can be contributed. There's nothing. I don't think there's anything forward about it. So, for example, Mantra, we debuted to. I keep saying we. I'm sorry. Please read this. Deloitte India partner retired. So Deloitte contributed. We sent 2 of our folks to Mantra for 3 months on deputation to help them prepare a policy paper, which they wanted to present to the government. So these kind of things are very, very important. Somewhere we have a host of technologies, IPs. We have a plethora of IPs. So we deploy these IPs, suitably modify it, all pro bono. Of course, there's a marginal cost so that there is. Otherwise, if you give everything free, you don't see the value for it. There's a very marginal notional cost actually. But at a notional cost, we deploy all this in our. So there's a dashboarding we have. This is primarily meant for the corporate sector. But we kind of fine-tune this dashboarding to cater to this particular organization, which we supported from the foundation, and help them get their data in a very, very structured and easy reading form. So in a way, think of these as wider partners than merely financial donors. I think that would be the first point I want to make. The second is, which is again the first point Nikam raised, talked about what are you part of the journey? Perfect. Yes, we should be a part of the journey. Minimum 3 years. I also made a minimum commitment of 3 years, sometimes extending beyond, depending on the nature of the project or the organization that we associate with. But we did say it's not that at the end of 3 years we come to know what's happened. There has to be certain time bound programs, certain milestones, and we also believe you will fail. It is like any startup journey. We also work with startups in the tech sector, right? It is like any startup journey. There will be certain crossroads. There will be certain misses. There will be certain ways in which you repivot. All this will happen. But please have certain plans, because you need to have a 3 months. I would have this kind of a milestone. 6 months I would do this. But if in 3 months it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean therefore we give everything up. But how are you going to reorient yourself? So therefore have more structured plans, which may probably it need not be 3 months, it can be 6 months, does not matter. But it has to be something that is commensurate with the nature and the size of the project that you undertake. So we need to therefore what we used to do was to be a little more active, if not intrusive partners, but at the same time support on every front. He says, okay, we have a problem with tech. I would set my tech support team out there to say, hey, they have a problem with this technology, go out and try to solve it for them. So it is kind of a support that we gave was wide ranging, and we could pull in resources. I mean, large organization, we can pull in resources. But yes, that's one way of addressing the point that you raised earlier, as well as what you raised.
Thank you, Sudarshan. Neeta, I'm going to come across to you. And a lot of your work has, though you are a funder, a lot of you work very closely with system orchestrators, change leaders. And in working with them, what have been some practices that you've seen that social leaders tend to follow that has enabled them to kind of learn and collaborate across sectors, collaborate across within the sector, across sectors, and learn to adapt their ways to, what is needed in order to accelerate towards systems? What have been some practices you've seen on the other side?
Thanks, Lakshmi. So first of all, I think it is looking at the problem and not your solution. Because when it comes from my solution, my program, my initiative, it doesn't allow for what other person wants, right? So collaboration usually starts from how are we seeing the problem, and do we connect at the level of the problem? Because then we are common to solve for that problem, and we do whatever is needed to solve for the problem. So I think the mindset, therefore, that I'm talking of is openness and a growth mindset of collaboration. And what we've also seen is the mindset permeates in the organization. So what leader demonstrates, you will see it in the fabric of the organization. And I'm sure if we close our eyes, we have examples of orgs who are like very extending partnership oriented. And we have examples of where, it's always hard. Like you have conversation and it's all off, right? That's one. The other I would say is also collaboration and partnerships and coming together to solve for a bigger problem requires time and space and energy. So it's not just intention, it has to be resourced with appropriate financial resources, time, because it cannot happen in addition to what all you're doing, right? So anything new comes at a cost of something. So something has to go out for something new to come in. So I think that's been other. And I think the third, again, being trust. I think trust is the currency of action. And whatever said and done, I think we can talk a bit on technical aspects, but if we don't relate to each other at a relational aspects, it's very hard to work together. And I think these characteristics are not just in the social innovators and change makers, but also for funders. So you could apply the same to the funders, right? Like, when do funders come together? What kind of mindsets block them? Do I understand your constraint and your constraint? Because all of us are answerable to our own internal setups, our own internal processes. So if we are unable to step into each other's shoes, it's hard to work together. So I think to me, and then the last point I would say is collaboration happens at a higher level and not at a specific level. So at a vision level and not like I'll do A, you'll do B. That is partnership. So for me, collaboration and partnerships and coalitions are more at a, again, more systemic level, which is an interest like a skeleton, like a spine for you, which cuts across everything. And then there are branches. You are doing different things, but you're all intact thing. That's fine. Coming together through that's fine because we all feel the problem is common. We are working towards a common problem, and then solutions emerge in different ways. So I feel like it's kind of arrows going in similar direction and not like one single arrow. That's how I.
Yeah, one of the things I used to say when I thought about scale is very often people say when you have to scale, okay, my solution has to scale, which is essentially like franchising a business model. But that is not what will scale, right? It is about trying to work towards the problem and not the solution. It's uh, I know we are a little short of time, so I want to be very quick. Camille, I want to ask you something, and this is something that Geeta alluded to. She spoke about trust, and she spoke about being able to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. But this is hard, right? Especially when you have people who have access to the resources, who have control over the resources. And then on the other side of the line, you have people that are seeking those resources. It has, I mean, as much as we may wish that it were not the case, it has led to huge power differentials between these two set of actors in the ecosystem. And it also leads to, there is a big gap in trust and there's not much transparency. And in your work, working across sectors, working very closely with philanthropy offices, what have been some things that you've seen or you've tried to implement that helps bridge that gap of both power, trust, and also transparency? And how do you get the wheels kind of oil to work together?
Thank you, Jasri. I'm just going to stand up if I might. I can't see some of you in the back, and I just wanted to see the faces here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think your question is so critically important. And Niti, I agree with you completely about the importance of trust. At Synergos, which means synergy, we were founded almost 40 years ago. Our kind of slogan is building trust works. And we've seen the challenges. It's something our founder, Peggy Delaney, believed in very much. And we've seen also how we're living in a world where there's a trust deficit, and that's growing. And I think, if anything, that has gotten us to focus even more about what we've learned about building trust over the decades, which actually started here in India when we were working with partners, corporate and public, on malnutrition. And the group then discovered that going on a retreat together, going to a place where they were spending several days together, opening up, having sessions just to get to know each other personally, understanding what each person brought to the discussion, whether they were physicians, they were from the private sector, they were from the communities that were experiencing this. I think spending that time together, and something we talk about a lot at Synergos in practice, is this concept of inner work leads to greater impact. And what do I mean by that? Well, part of it is understanding our own biases, understanding who we are, what drives us, learning more about ourselves. And ideally, that is going to help us lead to greater direction and greater focus on what we would bring to a situation. And Synergos' global network is very wealthy families and individuals around the world and also social entrepreneurs, senior fellows. Jack is a senior fellow in Singapore, for example. So we have civil society fellows, and we also have country programs around the world. And I'm mentioning this because we're a hybrid organization. And I really believe because we do bring these voices together, that breaks down those divisions of power. So if we are working on a collaborative community for action, whether it is around shifting food systems or education and the whole child on social and emotional learning, when we bring philanthropists in together, either in the same room or a virtual room, with social entrepreneurs, members of civil society, members of the community, because that's one of our core values. We know we're not going to even be a part of the solution if we are not listening to those most proximate. And I'm sure I'm sharing things that everyone in the room agrees with, but in practice, it is hard. And we've talked about it's challenging. So what do? Intentionally, we create these collaborative communities, a structure to bring the community together. And during those times, so for example, we've just come through 3 hours each month. We have a curriculum for shifting food systems, and we've had points of connection and reflection and small breakout rooms. So what I'm talking about is less transactional and more relational. And I think it's really critically important to think, as was mentioned earlier, if there are organizations, whether they're professional organizations, social organizations, those kind of collaboratives that are open and begin to address a problem and think creatively about it. These are really so intellectually big lifts that if you're coming together with a lot of different individuals, naturally, some of the conversations going to turn to how is this going to be funded? And I just came before coming here at a meeting in the Middle East where we brought together our social entrepreneurs and the philanthropists. And remarkably, in that room where there was trust, because we spent time together, we weren't thinking this person is going to fund, this person is bringing the expertise. It naturally led to partnerships and to funding. And so just to wrap up, I know we're short on time, but I think that relational aspect is in taking that time is just so critically important.
We're back. Thank you so much, Camille. Really appreciate it. I have many more questions, but I want to hand it over to Manisha to have a conversation with all of the people in the room. And then if time permits, we'll come back. And I'm sure maybe there are some questions from the audience to you as well.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. I think we heard a lot of great things, and I think it's well known and all of us have experienced it, especially in the last half decade or so, that fundraising has kind of taken over, a lot of conversations in the sector because there's so much burden on all our teams to constantly think about where do I get funding for my next project. And it's not just about, the burden on the teams. It's the well-being of the team. Everything is being affected. But it's also taken over the conversation so much that as organizations, we are hardly able to think about the other forms of capital that are available to us beyond the funds. And this is the conversation that's trying to then bring that together. And our speakers today talked about trust, relationships, networks, right? Resources of different forms that can really help us and support us in our work, which may be tangible or intangible. So I would just want to throw a question out to the audience to see how you feel about how do you see fundraising as different from orchestration? And if you've done it in your work, could you share some examples? Please share your name and organization and maybe keep your answers short so that we can hear from most of you. Anybody would like to go first? Anybody here who's fundraising actively in the fundraising space?
Alicia?
Are you one able to yeah you? Yeah, that's right. So hi everyone, I'm Khadija from Teach for Lebanon. I believe a lot of you are aware of the Teach for India concept, which is a very similar one that we operate in Lebanon. So you know what's interesting is that this is the first time I hear the word orchestrating. Yeah. We work around different founders and communities as an organization. We're kind of the midpoint between everyone, but the orchestration happens within the organization itself and solely within the organization. And we don't really find, and I think it's a model everywhere, where we would find on the same table founders, NGOs, governments, and the local community, all of them together talking about a certain, strategy or where are we going? Where do we want to fund and what is our vision? And it's something that we keep on saying for the past years. We need to bring everyone on the table to be able to design that program that speaks to everyone. But unfortunately, it feels like everyone has their own everyone has their own, interests. And as organization, in terms of survival, we try to meet ends. We want to bring everyone to the table. So we're in the middle, but all other parties are not talking to each other. So I know we're supposed to answer, but I'm hoping as well to understand when we're talking about orchestrating capital flows, what are successful strategies to bring these people together, even if they have different visions? That's a really good question, and we can perhaps come back to it after we hear from a few more people. But I think that's what we want to collectively answer today and understand. So thank you for raising that, Khadija.
Hi, can you so? I'm Camilla. I lead global school leaders and I'm based in Brazil. And I just wanted to mention that I think that Brazil has a very interesting pace on orchestrating capital or system change in education. So before joining GSL, I was with the Lemon Foundation, which is one of the major foundations in Brazil. And funders like the Lemon Foundation have come together to align on a shared agenda for education. And from there, started funding different initiatives. And that makes a huge difference because then it's much more coordinated and orchestrated, not only on the side of the NGOs that funders expected NGOs also to orchestrate among themselves, but funders being connected and sharing an agenda and a vision. So since I know you don't hear much about Latin America, because since I stepped into this global space, I feel that Latin America is not super represented. I felt that it's interesting to look at this case as a case study for orchestrating capital flows for system change.
Thank you for that comment, Camilla. I think it's very important that we kind of look beyond our national boundaries because there may be examples and inspirations of what has worked in contexts that are similar to ours. And the South-South learning, which is really picking up now, I think there's a lot of potential in getting, really good models from that to help with collaborations within our countries. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Siddesh. I run Leadership for Equity, and we work in education with systems change, very similar to Mantra with the governments. My question is in two parts. I love the concept about trust. And there's, for example, great trust between me and Santosh and Khushbu, and we work together really well. But that level of trust is missing from the regulatory framework in how funders look at organizations. So how do we maybe build that trust with maybe new donors, whether they're multilaterals or corporates or family foundations is one part. And the other part of that trust is also, while it's very refreshing to see conversations on systems change and orchestrating for systems change, the impact, we are still somewhere holding a systems change organization for the impact, the same kind of impact that you would hold a schools or a more direct to ground organization. So is there a link where we can see where systems change the system support organization rather than CSOs, they're SSOs, and they're tasked with a moving particular levers in the middle of the sector, not nearly close to the child, but around the child, so that we are able to, make it easier for others who are working closer to go there. So, whereas I have to still report impact on a child where I'm focusing more on a system. So, one, trust between funders and organizations, and orchestrating becoming much easier with redefining impact for a system support organization.
Any other comments from the audience, right?
can you organize it happen? Uh, just a couple of thoughts around what I have seen work over quite a few years, and in two spaces. One is where you have say a collaborative of sort or collation of sort, where there are more than one organization, and there's a pool of fund available with the donors, and that's where stakeholders come on table, which includes the government, the CSOs, the funders, as well as maybe the stakeholders at a learner level to define the vision that Neeta was talking about, that there is a shared vision to which everybody is aspiring for. But there also the bucket of fund is always limited, right? And that's where there is a requirement of infrastructure within the collaborative to have that very impact and all of that. So how do we also decide on uh, the percentage of funding that needs to be allocated for these different functions, and which function therefore is very important, right? From to be able to demonstrate the change, what Siddesh talked about, say at child level what's happening, but even what's happening at say a middle level with the government functionaries, and what's happening at the meta level at policy level, right? And how does fund gets allocated when there is a group who's actually working towards system change. And when we look at an org level also, very few NGOs would be there who would not be these days into CSR fundraising, right? And when we have CSR funds, when we have philanthropy, when we have, say, from foundations, family foundations, I think the same question also goes for organizations who are looking towards system change, because there is never say a dedicated funding or very few dedicated funding. Say, for example, to be able to do a very robust M&E, or to be able to do a narrative building, a communications exercise, to be able to kind of bring a shift in mindset and say a larger narrative. So whatever pool of fund that organization is able to raise, to be, again, you need an infrastructure internally to be able to see that how are we allocating these funds for these different functions which are required for us to orchestrate any program towards systems change. Because more and more funders want to fund for activities and program, but for a program to be successful and also to show impact, there is a huge machinery that works behind it, which includes impact measurement, which includes communicating, which includes a lot of collaboration with other stakeholders, and the whole idea of the time and energy that goes for it. So who's funding that? And if that's not there, and the CSR rules, regulations, whatever, so that whole orchestration within the organization, and then how does that reporting happens, and all those are questions which are there, but that is what is required, and that's where there's a lot of challenge, because anywhere where you would have allocated fund for those things from within the program, that can be justified, but there is never, say, a dedicated fund which is available to make these systems robust in an organization to be able to do those functions for systems change.
Thank you. And I think you've raised a very valid point, and I want to throw that question back to the audience. So in your experience, probably having gone through, grant cycles and looking at procurement of funds to reporting, to everything that comes in between, what do you think needs to shift in terms of maybe mindsets or behaviors or processes, even, physical processes, for us to work collectively towards systems change? And I think you've kind of answered that partly in terms of, how donors are maybe funding more at program level, and they need to look at how it cannot really at systems level change. But beyond that, are there any other thoughts, ideas from your experience? Yes.
I'm speaking from MakerPath. I'm representing the organization MakerPath.
You guys want to do that?
So several of these questions go together, and I'll just respond briefly. At Synergos, we talk about chains of trust. And I think if I look at Mantra for Change and Shikha Lokam, Synergos is honored to be one of the partner organizations. And so that's such a good example, because I can speak from my perspective that I have gone on field visits. I've seen teacher training. I've experienced, been on the school floor playing games and learning from the students. I've seen the work, and also I've seen the openness of the convenings. And so that's just an example to me of those circles of trust. and to be able to come to the table and talk about Synergos, our own kind of educational priorities, particularly around this full child, and bring that into the conversation and see that welcomed, and that that transparency and openness and the vulnerabilities. I would add the fact that we can come to the table and say what's challenging about this and what some of the obstacles are, as well as some of what we see as the pathways. And once we start to open up in that way, then you can see bringing and expanding those circles to funders and honesty. And I think, the narrative matters, because yes, if you say to a funder, I want funding for systems change work, maybe some don't yet understand the importance of this because their short-term vision, maybe not the long-term vision. But if that narrative says we would like to do this, this, and this, and it's understandable steps, and which we hope and which we aim to lead to this, which is the systems change, and then maybe having some examples of that, then it becomes a little bit easier, I think, for a funder to kind of wrap their head around it.
Maybe I'll address both what you asked and what we said from a corporate perspective. And that's what's most familiar to me. I think the first and foremost is I was there for about 2.5 years, and nobody ever came to me and told me, "Hey, this is what your company is about, and my program. It can't, of course, directly benefit my company. Creates a more conducive ecosystem for what you do, right? So, how much do you align with the larger objectives in the ecosystem of the corporate that you reach out to? I think that is the first and foremost. As we do when we reach out to our clients, this is exactly what we do. We don't talk about ourselves, we talk about our client, right? And that's how we create that trust with our client. The similar fashion is what I think the first thing you need to do is to look at the client, or in this instance, the potential donor, to say what is the ecosystem of that donor and in which way are you assisting, enabling that ecosystem become a bit better. You obviously, CSR cannot be funding for benefits of the operation per se, but the larger ecosystem, I think nothing like it. I've loved to hear more things about it. If somebody comes to Deloitte and says we are creating, so much more for education for the underprivileged so that they can become technically competent, we're very glad to hear it. We definitely identify with that cause first. Then we identify saying, hey, can we do more? The second part is, can we do more? Don't say, give me a check for 1.5 crores each year for 3 years. This is what we hope to do. How can you help us? And these are my requirements. And then I say, hey, listen, you want to do this? I'll send a couple of my folks out there. They will do it for you. You don't need an external person at all. You don't need the resources. We'll do it free of cost, pro bono. So the 1.5 crores may come down to 75 lakhs. So the second is, how do you involve? That's what I talk about, multiple touch points. And the last bit is reach out beyond the CSR head, involve the organization. So, for example, if you are in education, if you are in healthcare, can you speak to the relevant? Can you ask it may merely be a photo op, doesn't matter, but it creates that trust. You say, hey, listen, can your CFO come and speak to us on the latest legislation? Or can your tax person come and tell us about how does this GST? These kind of small things enable you to create multiple equations within the organization. And therefore, you're not
I also wanted to add to that question, and I'll say an unpopular opinion here. So I feel even within a funder, there's a growth, like for each organization, this is my comfort zone and this is my growth zone. Like I can do experimentation in that zone, and can this funder move in that direction? And if not, that funding is not good for you. It will pull you in directions in other ways. So that I just wanted to put it out there. And the second thing I wanted to say on the systems change and the people level reporting, and it's definitely, I'm fairly new at For Impact, just 1.5 years old here. But I think one thing that's been very refreshing for us here is, our focus is to say strong orgs lead to strong systems, and systems deliver better people level outcomes. Org are not supposed to, ideally, because you're trying to strengthen the system. If you're if you are going beyond that system, then what is the point of strengthening the system? So for us, the logic therefore is very clear, and even in the people level changes, you would want to measure what the system is measuring, not like adding on. But again, I think it's a big lift from seeing tangible changes, how many teachers, how many children, how many head teachers, to system operating better for the child. So it's a journey, I think. And the last thing I wanted to say on the trust piece is that it's a subjective element. I don't think there's a matrix of you as organizations, you're taking call on funders are taking call. It's a very subjective call. I would share my personal opinion here, which is, what I've valued in organization who have ability to show you mirror as well, right? Your way of funding is not always the ideal. But there are organizations.
We run a child protection program called Kavach, where we are looking at indicators that are specifically about the change in the system itself. And so, for example, if we are working with intermediaries, let's say frontline workers, and we are training them on how to spot child marriages that are happening in their villages, the indicator that you look for there is not necessarily if the child marriage was stopped or not. Of course, that's ultimately what you want to happen. But you're also looking at whether the individual is reporting those instances or not. And more of those instances of reporting coming in the first place is actually a good thing. Although eventually over time, as the system starts to work better, those reports will start to go down. Right? So that's ultimately what you want to see. But I think the point is that if you carefully choose indicators of the change in the system itself, you can start to measure that a lot better. In the LiftEd program that we run, for example, we have a series of metrics that we call system shift indicators, where we are explicitly measuring how the system itself is changing. Right? So are there more reports about the learning levels of children which are reaching middle managers? Are there discussions on that data that are actually happening? And so you're measuring those qualitative shifts in the way that the system is working, with the belief and the hope that ultimately that is going to mean that the time learns better. Right? So I think explicitly calling those out can be really